Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And let me start by thanking Chris for that really wonderful introduction. And he is certainly making sure that none of you are dozing. So thank you, Chris, very much for that. And let me, Chris referenced my last campaign, which was a squeaker. It wasn't decided until the 8th of December. My mother is fond of pointing out that that's the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. But I wouldn't have gotten there without the help of CWA. It just wouldn't have happened. We had labor walks throughout that campaign. We had phone calls, and CWA and the Working Families Party were front and center of every single thing that I did. So I want to thank you sincerely for all of the effort that you put out on my behalf. And I would like to think that the effort that you put out on my behalf is effort that is going to assist the working families of the 1st Congressional District, because the contrast between my opponent and the party he represents and the values he stands for and what I'd like to think I have brought to the table over the 9+ years that I've been a member of Congress is a very pronounced contrast. And I want to continue to have the opportunity to work on your behalf, and with your help, I will get there. So I appreciate that very, very much. Thank you. You heard Chris say that I was born into a CWA household. I was. My father worked for the New York Telephone Company, and I think some of you have heard me tell this story, but I'm standing here today because of the protections that my father's collective bargaining agreement gave to him. My father was an only child. His father died when he was 8. And he raised, along with my mother, who's a saint, raised 5 children, and he wanted us each to have an opportunity that he didn't have, and that was to go to college. And so he worked, and I mean worked, 70, 80, 90 hours a week in and week out. Where he would go months at a time without a day off. And I remember I used to hate the phone company, hated them, because I couldn't understand how they would make this guy with 5 kids work every single Christmas. I just couldn't understand it. Now, I'm a slow learner. It wasn't until I was in college that I realized that my father was getting double time and a half, and he was putting in for every Christmas. So, but it was the double time and a half that put me and my 4 siblings through college, and because I got that opportunity, again, I'll say one he didn't have, I get the opportunity to do what I do now. So that's the power of collective bargaining. That's what it means for workers to come together and say, you know what, we want our slice of the American dream too. And we're willing to work for it. We don't want anyone to hand us anything, but we're willing to work for it. We just want fairness. My father's life tells that story. And so, again, to all of you who see to it that all of your brothers and sisters have that opportunity, I want to say thank you. Now, you all know about the call center bill. As Chris said, I believe that outsourcing is the scourge of the American economy. It is at ground zero of what really is the fundamental problem that we have in our country right now, which is the hollowing out of the middle class. Now, there's nothing wrong with corporate profits. Corporate profits, what built our country. But when corporate profits come at the expense of the American worker, when corporate profits come at the expense of middle-class families trying to do what my family did for me, then there's something fundamentally wrong with it. And what outsourcing is all about, it is about the relentless pursuit of corporate profits at the expense of the middle class. That's what it's all about. And we have an opportunity here in at least one slice of our economy to stand up and say no, and that's call centers. We have that opportunity. We know that we've lost 500,000 call center jobs over the last several years. We know that these are good jobs. These are good, solid, middle-class jobs with benefits. Why should they be in India? Why should they be in the Philippines? Why should they be in Sri Lanka? They shouldn't. They should be right here in this country. And let me tell you, we dropped our bill, I think, on the 7th of December, Congressman McKinley and I, and I'm very proud that Congressman McKinley, my friend from West Virginia, is the co-sponsor of this bill. Yes, let's hear it for Congressman McKinley. Around the 20th of December, the governments of India and the Philippines began an intensive lobbying effort to kill our bill. Now, I was asked what I thought about that. Now, here's what I think about that. I think that nothing that anyone can say provides a more powerful and a more eloquent statement for why we need our bill than to see the extent to which the government of the Philippines and the government of India is trying to block it. So, if our work and our workers, but our work is so important to their economy, doesn't that just make it unbelievably obvious that it's going to be as important to our economy as well, and that we've got an obligation to keep those jobs here? Of course it does. So let me say one last thing on the bill. You guys did a fabulous job yesterday, fanning out among my colleagues to sell this bill, because when I went onto the floor last night to vote, about 6 o'clock, I had a steady stream of people coming up to me saying, I just heard about your bill, I'm going to sign on to your bill. In every 30 seconds. So, yeah. So, as Chris said, we are going to get this done. Job one right now is to continue to build co-sponsors so that we can show the leadership of the House of Representatives that this is something we're serious about, and not just that we're serious about it, but that this has bipartisan support. And that's what you began to accomplish yesterday. We've got to stay on this job, and I'm very confident that we can get it done. Now, two more things. FMLA. You know that we were successful in passing a bill that finally, after decades, provided FMLA protections to flight attendants. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We are now moving from law to reality. We are now moving, starting, I think, just last week, the Labor Department announced that the rulemaking process to put that bill into action has now begun. So we are reaching the end, a very happy end of a long process. And again, I want to thank CWA and the flight attendants for their steadfast attention to this and for seeing to it that we got this done. So thank you all very much for that. And lastly, let me say this. We are in the midst, there's no other way to phrase this, we are in the midst of a concerted war on labor. There's no polite way to phrase it. There's no more succinct way to phrase it. My colleagues in the House of Representatives on the Republican side of the aisle have declared war on organized labor. Now, let me just give you some of the things that have happened. There have been over 40 separate efforts in the House of Representatives just in the last 13 months to either eliminate the National Labor Relations Board or defund it so it can't possibly do its job, or eliminate Davis-Bacon protections, a provision that has been in federal law since the 1930s, or eliminate project labor agreements, or change the way collective bargaining units are organized. This is an assault on the middle class. This is an assault on working families. And it is an assault that collectively we must challenge every single day. We must challenge it, and it's a fight that we must win. Now, here's where we are. Right after World War II, and through the 50s and the 60s, 35% of the private sector workforce in this country was organized. 35%. By the way, a period that coincided with enormous economic growth in this country. A period that saw people able to climb that next rung on the ladder so that they could get, as I said before, their slice of the American dream. Not a coincidence, folks, not a coincidence that 35% of our private sector workers were organized so that they could command and get reasonable salaries, living wages, wages that allowed them to hold their heads up, provide for their families, send their kids to college. That's what happened in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And now where are we? Less than 7% of our private sector workforce is organized. 7%. And we are struggling through the worst economic conditions in this country since the Great Depression. Again, I will say to you, not a coincidence. Not a coincidence. The middle class is shrinking. Wealth is being concentrated in the hands of a very few. Now, we keep hearing about big labor, and how evil big labor is. 7% is big labor? What if we grew to 8%? Would that be humongous labor? Ginormous labor? I mean, this big labor? And what's their goal? What's their goal? 5%? 4%? Zero. And where are we when we get that? With a middle class that's only this big? So this is, the president talks about this as this is the defining struggle of our age. It is. I'm going to close with two statistics. And these are statistics that tell the story. We are crawling our way out of a recession, scratching and crawling our way out of a recession. We got a long way to go. But guess what? Corporate profits in this country right now are at a higher percentage of gross domestic product than they've ever been. Ever. So we're all struggling, and corporations are making more as a share of the economy than they ever have. They're sitting on $2 trillion in cash. $2 trillion. This is non-banks, corporations, non-banks. And then contrast it with this number. Total payroll compensation as a percentage of gross domestic product has never been lower. So if you want to talk about two Americas, there it is. Corporate profits way up here, total payroll compensation way down here. Do you think it's a coincidence that total payroll compensation is way down here and only 7% of our private sector workforce is unionized? That ain't a coincidence. That's a fact. That's a causal relationship. So we have an obligation, those of us in elected office and those of you who are working on behalf of the members you represent. We have an obligation to turn this around. It's going to be a fight, but let me tell you something. When you guys go to vote in November, you should be thinking about one thing. Where does the person you're voting for stand on the ability of working families to organize, to come together, to have lives of dignity, to have jobs of dignity, and to provide for their families? That's the test. So, I have probably gone on too long. But I want to tell you how much your support means to me. I want to tell you what a fabulous job you did yesterday, and I want to tell you to keep on doing it. Thank you all very, very much.